as was introduced, I'm Nancy Herota. I work at the Sacramento County Office of Education, and what we plan to do in the next 30 minutes or so is to provide you with an overview of this new resource that I know will be so relevant to your work directly in schools, and we hope that you help to get the word out, because this is a brand new resource that has just been recently adopted by the State Board of Education and is currently posted on the website. So John, if you can go to the next slide. So this was a very, well, first of all, let me share with you that we had a very accelerated timeline. It was an accelerated timeline that began in September of 2020, and it was adopted, this final document, by the State Board in May of 2021. So we had an incredible team that came together. This is a project funded by the California Department of Education, but it was a collaboration between the State Board of Education and collaboration that led this effort. Here at the Sacramento County Office of Education, we served as the lead agency, the fiscal agency, but we hired and partnered with ISTE. And you heard from Richard Kalata and Jisoo yesterday, and they were key partners at ISTE in guiding this work. And their role was to lead the comprehensive process of developing this document, which included the coordination of all of the writing teams, as well as putting together the final products that we'll be sharing with you today. We also knew that it was important to work with CUE because of their connection to experts in California, educators who have expertise around the use of technology. So they were an incredibly important partner. And I won't go into a lot of detail, but I will share with you that we had an incredible team of writers with extensive expertise in the area of digital learning. We worked with Dr. Catherine Kennedy, who worked with CUE. We also worked with Dr. Douglas Fisher and Lorea Martinez, who wrote the section on social emotional learning. And for ELA, ELD, we were very fortunate to be able to tap into Dr. Hallie Yop and Nancy Brenelson, as well as Nancy Fry and Doug Fisher. And Hallie and Nancy's role was critical because, if you don't know, they also were the key authors of the ELA ELD framework released by CDE. So the connection between this document and the alignment with other CDE resources was critically important. Similarly, with mathematics, we worked with Dr. Joe Bowler and Kathy Ann Williams, who wrote the mathematics section. And Dr. Bowler is currently leading the revisions to the math framework. So again, the coordination of these efforts with this document and the alignment with the framework documents released by CDE was critically important. Next slide. What I'd like to play for you next is a video interview with Dr. Linda Darling Hammond. And in this video, she provides the purpose and the rationale for the development of this guide. So John, if you want to push play.
This new guidance does a couple of things. Number one, it really helps us think about how to take what we've learned about technology integration in school into an era where we'll have kids back in person and learn from what we've done and what the field knows about effective uses of technology. In addition, it also identifies the big ideas in English language arts and math around our standards that are the core standards around which the other standards dance, if you will, and helps teachers see how to teach in that integrated way, both to give teachers some framework for teaching the standards using technology around the big ideas, and also to give them a lot of resources, examples, vignettes that will bring alive the way in which teaching and learning can be really engaged in an exciting way. And so the purpose and the rationale for the standards was both to enable teachers to use technology more effectively and to benefit from the learning that had occurred.
So what we plan to do in the short time that we have with you is we will provide a very high-level overview of the key sections of this guidance document. And you will see that Section A focuses on the digital learning components and provides guidance around digital learning practices. But another key component, and about 2/3 of this document, is focused on standards guidance. And I think that's really important to highlight for all of you who work with teachers or are teachers in the classroom, because this is these are sections that highlight the use of technology in these content areas, but also presents a different way of looking at standards. And I'll leave it at that because we will go into more detail. Throughout these sections, as Dr. Linda Darling-Hammond highlighted, we have included vignettes. There are interviews and spotlights of examples of classroom practice. And these illustrative examples really do bring this content to life. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to John Fleischman.
Well, thanks, Nancy. I appreciate that. And it's great to be here. And it's wonderful to see all of your faces. And thank you, Sunny, for that nice introduction, and Augustine and Rosa. It was really my pleasure to work on the original website for School to Home. And it's just fantastic to see the growth over the years. And it was also really rewarding for me to come out of semi-retirement, and since I couldn't travel anyway, to be able to work with Nancy and this amazing team at SCOE to work on this guide. And it's been over a year-long process to put the guide together. A lot of my involvement was with the first section, Section A, which goes into implementing research-based digital learning practices. The first chapter, Designing Effective Engaging Digital Learning, is a major focus. But then, because of the current times, we're also focusing on assessment and social emotional learning. Before we commenced any of the development, ISTE did an amazing job of doing research on what we know about digital learning and online learning. And, a lot of it is still new, especially with distance learning. I actually feel for the teachers that were just thrown into it this past year. But I wish we had the guidance at the beginning of the pandemic, but we do have it now, and I think it's going to be a real useful document over time. So I really see, and Richard Culata, who worked very closely with us on this project, talks about the essential ingredients or key elements for digital learning. I vary a little bit with his thinking. I really see the importance of equitable access. We did a lot of interviews and focus groups with students, and we surveyed parents and teachers, and access is still an issue. Access to both hardware, although there's been an amazing, move forward this past year, but connectivity has been a real issue. And so I'm delighted with the new Infrastructure Act and knowing that we're going to all move towards better connectivity for schools and for homes. The second major element before any of this can happen is really appropriate content. There's been such an explosion over the past 25 years. I'm so old, I go back to the early days of technology, and now everything is web-based. It's all online, and it's got to be challenging for a lot of teachers to select the content. And by the way, that's another appendix in this guide. Q did a wonderful job putting together high-quality free and freemium applications that can be acquired. So when you take a look at the guidance, you'll see that is one section. And then the third element, which is absolutely essential, is prepared teachers. And I think that's what School to Home is all about. It's about also ensuring that teachers are well prepared, and that's really critical. So it's these three elements that are essential before you can really do effective digital-based instruction or online learning. And the ultimate result is a happy student. So the guide is really based on two national frameworks. And these frameworks, one by ISTE and one by national standard, is called the International Society for Technology and Education Standards. And these are really the essential skills that teachers need to be effective in their use of technology. It identifies those skills. The second guide is as I mentioned, and it's on the screen here, is developed by the Virtual Learning Leadership Alliance and Quality Matters. And what it does is it sets out a vision for effective online teaching specifically. And it does overlap with a number of the ISTE standards. And it really goes into that contextualized, online teaching realm. But what's nice is throughout the entire guide, we reference back to those standards and how it's incorporated into the different sections. Chapter 1 is really the meat of the technology component. We do address connectivity rather extensively and talk about some examples of how districts and schools have dealt with connectivity, talk about devices, and provide lots of links to resources as well. And the content management, so many schools now are using learning management systems and content management systems. So we do address the role of those tools in managing content in the school environment and beyond the school environment. Through this legislation that authorized the funding for this entire project, the legislators were very concerned about special populations, meeting the needs of students with disabilities, the needs of English learners, and the needs of foster youth. So we take a special focus on those three populations and go more in depth with specific ideas on how to work with those populations. We also address and provide resources for supporting teachers, and both initially and ongoing with professional development. And we identify a number of different resources that are out there to support the process. And very critically, we go into what constitutes meaningful digital learning experiences. And we address things like universal design and so on. So there's a lot of great content in that first chapter. The second chapter really goes into assessment. And Nancy mentioned Dr. Doug Fisher and his role. He's done a lot of work in this area. And this has been a challenge for many, many years, is how do we assess learning at a distance? It's always been problematic. And so some interesting thoughts and ideas are presented in this chapter on both assessment for learning, assessment as learning, and assessment of learning. One of the things I wanted to mention as well, one of the highlights, and people have commented about the guidance, is the role of vignettes and stories that we include throughout the entire document. And these really shed light of what teachers are currently doing and how they're using technology to distance and learning using digital technology in the classroom. So to that end, we also have gone around the state and we videotaped teachers and experts. I'd like to show you a teacher from Temecula High School named Kristen Morales, and she's done a number of webinars, but she's very articulate and very passionate about the role of assessment. So let's take a moment and hear just a short clip from Kristen.
When it comes to formative assessment, technology is king. It rules formative assessment in a way that old-fashioned paper, pencil, hand scoring never could. I've been teaching for over 20 years, and the move to technology for formative assessment allows me to give immediate feedback to the students. They know what their grade is right away. But more importantly, I do too, and I can pinpoint where the need is and intervene the next day in class. We don't need to wait 2, 3, 4 days a week to intervene. We intervene the next day. So in that respect, technology has really changed formative assessment in a way that allows teachers to act immediately to address the needs of the students.
And by the way, this is the first public showing of some of these video clips. So we're delighted to be able to share those with you today. They will be posted on the CDE website, and at the conclusion of our presentation, we'll provide some links to the various resources about the guidance. So the third chapter in this section, Section A, is on social emotional learning. I tell you, I don't know about you, but when I pick up an educational journal or I get something online, I constantly see, and the issue of social emotional learning is addressed. And it's no wonder. I mean, this has been a challenging year, and it is a very important issue. So for this chapter, we went to one of the national experts, a very well-respected expert on this, Dr. Lorea Martinez, and she wrote this entire chapter. It's really about fostering the inclusive digital communities, but she specializes in both online and classroom. This is where obviously it's more challenging. It's very different than a classroom setting of addressing social emotional skills. This wheel really represents Lorea's thinking about social emotional learning. And at the center of the wheel is SEL, and it's surrounded by these 5 different competency areas, if you will: self-awareness, self-management, responsible decision-making, relationship skills, and social awareness. So she really goes into a great amount of detail, and I think you'll find this chapter especially readable and especially useful as you begin to look at expanding your activities in the classroom and beyond on social emotional learning. So at this point, I'm going to turn it back to Nancy, and she is going to talk about these two other major segments on standards for math and standards for ELA and ELD and literacy. Nancy?
Okay, thank you. So as John shared with you, section B focuses on standards guidance for mathematics. And if you'll go to the next slide, this next slide highlights some of the key content areas. So the first chapter of this section focuses on the use of technology to teach mathematics. And then the second chapter in this section focuses on standards around its guidance around how to teach mathematics through the big ideas. And I'll talk about the connection to these big ideas and the new revised math framework that's currently under development. And then the bulk of this section, the remaining chapters, focus on the presentation of mathematics standards in these grade bands. And I'll share a sample of what that looks like. What's important to note, next slide, is that again, the approach that is presented in this guidance document is aligned with the new math framework that will be presented to the state board for adoption next year. So we're very fortunate in having Dr. Bowler, who is leading this effort, be the key writer, the author for the mathematics section. And when you go to the next slide, John, what the bulk of this section focuses on is how these standards, both the standards and the practice standards, it's both the content and practice standards, are organized around these big ideas. And they're presented in a way where it shows the interconnected nature of all of these standards that help teachers teach mathematics in a very integrated way. So with that, we're going to go to the next slide where you'll have an opportunity to hear from Dr. Bowler, and she will describe how the big ideas are organized in this current document.
So the big ideas that we have chosen to highlight in the new guidance are the sort of most important and central areas of mathematics. They're the big ideas that if teachers and students spend time on those in classrooms, a lot of the sort of smaller methods will be brought into those. So we didn't just group standards to make these big ideas, but we really thought about what are the most critical areas of mathematics, what mathematics is there that sort of underpins a lot of other mathematics that's really kind of foundational for kids. This big ideas approach will really bring about students being more engaged, focused on the more important mathematics, teachers understanding and seeing maths a little bit differently, seeing it as this connected subject. One of the initiatives that we've highlighted in the California Maths Framework is bringing data science into mathematics more, and not just sort of data science as a high school subject, but really helping all kids develop data literacy. We think that's really important just for living in the world these days, and being able to look at social media and know when something isn't right or when they may be being misled. That's all a kind of data literacy. And so one of the things these big ideas do is highlight that data piece all through the grades.
Great. Thank you, John. So this next slide, and it's a very short video, highlights from a teacher's perspective how these big ideas have supported teaching and learning in mathematics in his classroom.
The benefits of this approach, especially these big ideas with mathematics, is the power of intercontextuality, making things real for the students. A lot of times on virtually, there's a lot of apps, but if we can make things around them and make it real, that's what's going to make it stick. That's what's going to make them remember, oh, I remember counting arrays on a tile. I remember going in my kitchen looking for things to measure. That's what matters, those concrete skills.
So I won't go into this very extensive detail of how these big ideas are presented, but know that for every grade span that you saw in the table of, or in these chapters that I highlighted, this is the way in which these big ideas are presented. They will be considered to be included in the draft 2022 mathematics framework. So the information that's in our current document is intended to be incorporated into the math framework. So the alignment, again, with what teachers have access to now will inform what's to come and what will ultimately be adopted by the state board. So the next slide highlights section C, and this is a section that focuses on ELA literacy and ELD standards. To the math section, the first chapter of this section focuses on the use of technology to support literacy and ELA, ELD instruction. There is standards guidance around these content areas. And then in the chapters from 13 to 17, the organization of these standards are presented by these grade spans. And I'll share with you in a subsequent slide how these standards are organized, because it does look a little differently, but the concept of highlighting the interrelated nature of standards is a common theme in both sections. So you go to the next slide. One thing to point out is, again, we wanted to ensure that the content in this document was well aligned and connected to the ELA ELD framework. And being the authors of the ELA ELD framework, the authors did a masterful job of organizing the standards around the 5 cross-cutting themes that are currently in the ELA ELD framework. So the next slide is a link to a video, I believe, John. Yes, so Dr. Hallie Yap, who was, again, the author of this section, a key author along with Nancy Brynelson, will share highlights of how these standards are organized in Section C.
We organized the California CCSS for ELA and literacy and the ELD standards according to the cross-cutting themes that we identified in the ELA ELD framework several years ago. Those became our guideposts, if you will, on how to think about these standards. As we look at the strands of ELA and literacy, which are reading, writing, listening, speaking, and language, and as we look at the parts of the ELD standards, which are interacting in meaningful ways and teaching children about how English works, as well as foundational skills, we saw some overarching themes, and those themes are these 5, and they cut across many, many of those standards. One of those themes is meaning making, that as we read, we are, the heartbeat of what we're doing when we read is that we are engaging in meaning making. A second theme is language development. Language development too cuts across all those strands of ELA and literacy, as well as the parts of the ELD standards. Language development matters for reading. Language development matters for writing. It matters for listening and speaking. It cuts across all aspects of learning in the language arts. A third key theme, or overarching theme, or cross-cutting theme, if you will, is effective expression. It's not just knowing language, and it's not just communicating meaning, but it's how we do it that matters. The fourth overarching theme, cross-cutting theme, is content knowledge. We know there is a very powerful relationship between content knowledge, what we know, what our background knowledge is, what knowledge we bring to bear to our reading, to our writing, and to our engaging in other communication acts with one another. The fifth overarching theme, cross-cutting theme, is foundational skills. None of those other things I said would happen well without kids being able to access print. And this is the hallmark of early years in school. So those 5 themes that I've just mentioned, meaning making, language development, effective expression, content knowledge, and foundational skills, those have become our critical areas of instructional focus.
And very quickly, we'll play one more video clip. And again, this is a teacher who describes the use of technology to teach language and literacy.
And you'll notice that he's a kindergarten teacher.
One of the ways that I can bring reading into students' lives is through 3D printing. 3D printing sight words, where students are really able to not just write the word, they're able to see the word, they're able to touch the word, they're able to put it into Play-Doh. You can put it in rice, and you can have the students search for the word. And so it really gives kids custom hands-on manipulatives that are specifically made for students. And it really helps them feel ownership over their learning as well. I think there's definitely some ways that technology can be incorporated to really provide student support in reading, writing, listening, and speaking. The fact that with technology, with videos, students have access 24/7. And so if I sit in front of the classroom and I read a book, they get to only hear me reading that book once. But all of a sudden, if I take my phone out of my pocket, give it to one of my students on the carpet, they can record me reading that book. And that becomes something that students can go back and reference as much as they would like to.
My name is Marvin.
Great. And just very quickly, I wanted to share with you the way in which the ELA, ELD section is organized around these standards. So it looks a little different, but what the sections for each of the grade spans highlight are the key ELA, ELD standards, and then they, in the second column, highlight the related standards and the instructional considerations. And again, the goal and the purpose of both sections B and C are to help teachers identify those critical areas of instructional focus, as Hallie mentioned. So with that, what we'd like to do is just share with you what is currently available on the CDE website. And Augustine, our plan is to send the PowerPoint to you so that everyone here has access to the PowerPoint as well as the links. But on the CDE website, we currently have posted the PDF online version of this document. There are also 3 separate webinars focused on each of the sections that we've described with our content experts and our key writers who contributed to the webinars, as well as teachers who were interviewed. You've seen clips of the videos that have been developed, and those are all currently on the website. I'm going to turn it over to John to talk about the development and the status of the website that should be released very soon.
We are this close, this close to releasing the website. It's been a long haul. As I mentioned, we went around the state doing videotaping of teachers and experts. We also plan to release an ebook. It's the first time that CDE will release an ebook. We're hoping that it's released with our final document. We obviously need to be very, very careful with making sure everything is fully accessible. So all of the videos include closed caption. The website goes through a lot of very careful structures to ensure that accessibility. So those are some of the issues we've been dealing with, but we're very, very close. As Nancy said, the PDF is currently posted on the CDE website, but the actual website will include everything. It will include an HTML version of the entire guidance because it's so much easier to access, not a PDF, but through the web. So everything will be searchable. You can pull up a certain grade level. You can go right to a specific standard. You'll be able to see any of the videos. So it'll give you the maximum flexibility in terms of using this tool. You know, we did a technology guide and we want to walk the talk. So that's exactly what we're doing. So we'll have maximum ability to get things out there. So I think, like I said, we have our final meeting with CDE and the state board next week, and we fully expect the website to be probably launched towards the end of next week. And like I said, we're very happy to be able to share with you some of the videos today. So we hope this will be a useful guide as you move into the future and do look at a new way of addressing standards, but most importantly, state-of-the-art information about using digital technology in the classroom, fully researched, and using technology to reach and serve learners at a distance.